The Silence After the Storm. The Day American Hellcats Erased an Air Force. Part 1. The Spectre in the Sky. They called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. It sounds like a relic, a piece of military slang that dulls the enormity of what happened. By sunset on June 19, 1944, the once invincible Japanese Naval Air Force, the Kokutai, had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force, shattered in a single, staggering day of aerial slaughter. But to reduce it to a score, over 400 Japanese aircraft destroyed against 24 American losses, is to miss the story entirely. This was not a battle, it was an execution. A clinical, brutal demonstration of a fundamental truth the world was just beginning to grasp. Modern war is won not by the spirit of the warrior, but by the relentless, grinding power of industry, logistics, and adaptive science. It was the day the ghost of Pearl Harbor was finally, definitively exorcised from the Pacific sky by a brutish, magnificent machine called the Hellcat. To understand the cataclysm of June 19, 1944, you must first feel the palpable, gut-churning despair of December 1941 and the 2 harrowing years that followed. In the clear skies over Oahu, the Mitsubishi A6M Sen, Reisen to the Japanese, was not just an aircraft, it was a terrifying revelation. To the stunned American defenders flying a handful of scrambling P-40s and P-36s, and later to the outclassed pilots of the F4F Wildcat at Wake Island and the Coral Sea, the Zero was a phantom. It defied every Western assumption about fighter design. It was staggeringly light, could turn in a room, possessed an impossible range, and was armed with cannons that could shred an aircraft with a single burst. It outclimbed, outmaneuvered, and psychologically dominated anything the United States could put in the air. American pilots, flying the stout but slow Wildcat, developed desperate survivalist tactics. They would dive from altitude, fire a quick burst, and use their aircraft's sturdier construction to dive away at high speed, praying the Zero couldn't catch them. To engage in a classic turning dogfight was a death sentence. You couldn't climb with it, you couldn't turn with it, recalled one veteran. The only thing you could do was dive and hope he didn't follow you down. The early carrier battles, Coral Sea, Midway, were strategic American victories, but they were won at horrific cost in the air and through phenomenal luck and cryptanalysis. At Midway, brave, undernumbered American dive bomber pilots won the day, but their Wildcat escorts were butchered. The Zero's legend grew, etched in the fire of burning American aircraft and the lost faces of young pilots. The war in the Pacific in those early years was a painful, bloody tutorial, paid for in the currency of lost ships, shattered aircraft, and dead friends. Part 2. The Metal Answer. Forging the Hellcat. That painful tuition, however, was not wasted. While pilots fought and died, a quiet revolution was underway in a factory in Bethpage, New York. Engineers at Grumman Aircraft, led by designers like Bill Schwendler and Bob Hall, were not just sketching a new fighter, they were offering a philosophical rebuttal to Japanese martial and engineering doctrine. The Japanese prized Yamato Damashi, the fighting spirit, and engineered its embodiment, lightweight, agile, and demanding supreme skill. America's answer would be born of pragmatism, mass production, and a grim understanding of survival. The team devoured every after-action report, every pilot's debriefing. They learned the Zero's secrets. Its incredible agility came from a lack of armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and a lightweight airframe that could not withstand sustained punishment. The Grumman design philosophy became stark. Forget trying to outturn the Zero. Build a fighter that could take a hit and keep flying, that could dive like a locomotive, that could outmuscle its opponent in the vertical plane, and that could be flown effectively by a young ensign from Pensacola with 300 hours, not years, of training. Thus, the F6F Hellcat was born.
It was not a graceful aircraft. Nicknamed the Iron Works and the aluminum tank by its crews, it was all brutal function. It was built around a massive 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial engine, over double the power of the Zero's initial plant. This engine was housed in a barrel-like fuselage, wrapped in an armored glass canopy and a pilot's seat backed by thick steel plate. Self-sealing fuel tanks lined its belly. Its wings were stout platforms for 6 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns, whose heavy, high-velocity rounds could tear a Zero apart from standoff ranges. It was heavier, faster in a dive, and could absorb punishment that would vaporize its opponent. But its most revolutionary feature was its simplicity. Where the Zero was a finely tuned samurai sword, the Hellcat was a sledgehammer that anyone could swing. Its controls were straightforward, its landing gear wide and sturdy, its cockpit layout logical. A fresh ensign from Pensacola with 300 hours could climb into a Hellcat and with proper tactics have a fighting chance against a veteran Zero pilot. By late 1943, this new instrument of vengeance began to arrive on American carriers. For pilots who had known only tactical retreat and desperate defense, the Hellcat felt less like a machine and more like a promise, the promise of payback. Part 3. The Convergence. Strategic necessity meets tactical reality. The stage for the decisive clash were the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Guam, Tinian. For Japan, they were the inner perimeter of the absolute national defense sphere. Their loss would put the Japanese home islands within range of the new, terrifying B-29 superfortress. For the United States, under the relentless island-hopping strategy of Admiral Chester Nimitz, they were the essential airfields from which to bomb Japan into submission. The invasion of Saipan began on June 15, 1944. To protect this beachhead, Admiral Raymond Spruance deployed the crowning achievement of American naval power, Task Force 58, commanded by the brilliant, taciturn Admiral Mark Mitzger. Task Force 58 was a floating nation of steel and fury. Its core was 15 fast carriers, 7 heavy Essex-class, and 8 light Independence-class, surrounded by a protective screen of 7 modern battleships, 8 heavy cruisers, 13 light cruisers, and 69 destroyers. On the flight decks and in the hangar bays of this armada sat nearly 900 aircraft. Over half of them, more than 450 of them, were F6F Hellcats. This was not just a fleet, it was an expression of American industrial might, a mobile airbase of unprecedented power. Opposing them was Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's first mobile fleet, the last hope of the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier arm. On paper, Ozawa held a tactical advantage. His aircraft, particularly the new Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber and the Nakajima B-6N Jill torpedo bomber, had a significantly longer combat radius, up to 300 miles, than their American counterparts. Ozawa's plan, A-Go, was to use this range to strike the American fleet from beyond the effective range of Mitzger's fighters, shuttle his planes to land bases on Guam and Rota to rearm and refuel, and strike again on the return leg. It was an elegant, theoretical plan. The reality on Ozawa's flight decks was a portrait of a nation at the end of its logistical tether. His 9 carriers, including the veteran Shokaku, Zueku, and the new Taiho, held a patchwork air group. There were still a handful of veteran pilots, the survivors of the grueling campaigns from Pearl Harbor to the Solomons, but they were a dying breed. The vast majority of his aircrew were replacements, young men rushed through abbreviated training programs. Many had less than 50 hours of total flight time, some as little as 20. They could take off and land in calm seas, but complex navigation, formation flying, and deflection shooting were often beyond them. Their aircraft, while advanced in design, were now being built by a strained industry with diminishing resources and quality control. The famed Zero had been updated, but it was still fundamentally the same lightweight, fragile machine of 1941, now facing a generation of heavier, more powerful Allied fighters. Ozawa was not just outnumbered, he was betting on a ghost, the lingering myth of Japanese individual superiority against the cold, hard arithmetic of American industrial and human output. Part 4. The Long Morning, First Contact, and the Gathering Storm. Aboard the flagship USS Lexington in the Combat Information Center, a dimly lit nerve center of glowing radar scopes and crackling radios, the atmosphere on the morning of June 19th was one of focused tension, not fear. Advanced SG surface search and SK air search radar provided a picture of the battle space that Ozawa could only.
The first wave was shattered. The inexperienced Japanese pilots, many seeing Hellcats for the first time, broke formation in panic. The Hellcat pilots, drilled in the thatch weave and section tactics, worked in pairs, covering each other. A Zero would latch onto a Hellcat's tail, only to have his wingman cut across and blast him out of the sky. Of the 70-plus aircraft in the first wave, fewer than 24 penetrated to the fleet, where they met a horizon-blackening wall of flak from the battleships and cruisers. None scored a significant hit. The second wave, 1,100 to 1,200 hours. Even as the first wreckage was settling into the sea, radar picked up a larger second wave, over 120 aircraft. Task Force 58's secret weapon was its ability to cycle aircraft. Squadrons low on fuel or ammunition would land, be rapidly refueled and rearmed by hyper-efficient deck crews, sometimes in under 20 minutes, and relaunch. Fresh Hellcats were always climbing to relieve those engaged. Thompson and Carson landed, their hands shaking from adrenaline. As they gulped down water and relayed quick reports to intelligence officers, ground crews swarmed Lucky Lady. Fuel hoses were connected, ammunition belts fed into the wings, and a mechanic patched a fist-sized hole in the left aileron. Within 25 minutes, they were catapulted back into the fight. The second wave met a similarly horrific fate. The pattern repeated, Hellcats diving from superior altitude, slashing through bomber formations, then climbing away before the more agile Zeros could react. One of the few successes for the Japanese was a single torpedo hit on the battleship USS South Dakota, causing moderate damage and casualties. But the cost was absurdly disproportionate. The sky was now crisscrossed with hundreds of black smoke trails, the coffin tracks of dying aircraft. Life rafts and oil slicks dotted the ocean below. The third and fourth waves, 1,300 to 1,500 hours. Desperate, Ozawa launched his remaining aircraft in a third wave of about 80 planes and a final, pathetic fourth wave of 50. By now, the outcome was preordained. The third wave included some of Ozawa's best remaining veterans, and they fought with terrifying skill and bravery. Thompson found himself locked in a turning duel with a Zero whose pilot was clearly an ace. The Zero turned inside him with ease, its cannons firing. Rounds thudded into the armored bulkhead behind Thompson's head. Remembering his training, Thompson broke off the turn, firewalled the throttle, and climbed straight up. The Zero tried to follow, but its lower power-to-weight ratio bled off its speed. As it stalled, Thompson rolled over and came back down, his gun stitching a line of holes from the Zero's cockpit to its tail. It fell away, smoking. "Splash 1-0, a good one," he radioed, his voice hoarse. The fourth wave was a tragedy. Comprised of every flyable plane Ozawa could scrape together, including obsolete Kate torpedo bombers and even float planes, it was annihilated before it even reached the fleet. It was less an attack and more of a sacrifice.
The submarine sting. Amidst the aerial carnage, American submarines delivered the coup de grace. The USS Albacore put a single torpedo into Ozawa's magnificent new flagship, the carrier Taiho. A damage control mistake, opening vents to clear fumes, turned a manageable hit into a catastrophe. Hours later, aviation fuel vapors ignited, causing a cataclysmic explosion that tore the ship apart. Almost simultaneously, the USS Kavala hit the veteran carrier Shokaku with 3 torpedoes. As it burned, ordnance cooked off, sending it to the bottom. 2 of Japan's premier carriers were lost not to aerial bombs, but to the silent service, completing the day's disaster. Part 6. The Harvest of Fire. Aftermath and Analysis. By late afternoon, the silence was absolute and eerie. The radio channels, once jammed with calls and warnings, were quiet. Thompson guided his battered Hellcat back to the Lexington. As he caught the arresting wire and felt the jarring deceleration, a profound exhaustion washed over him. Climbing out of the cockpit, his legs wibbly, he looked around. The deck was a scene of organized frenzy, but the pilots emerging from other aircraft wore expressions of stunned disbelief. They lived. The initial tally was staggering and would later be refined. Japanese losses, between 395 and 430 aircraft shot down. 3 carriers sunk, Taiho, Shokaku, and Hio. The latter finished off the next day. American losses, 29 aircraft lost in combat, many to the few veteran Zero pilots. Approximately 130 aircraft lost operationally, mostly due to crashes landing in the dark after the later Mission Beyond Darkness, though many aircrews were rescued. 1 battleship damaged. But the numbers told half the story. Japan had lost more than planes and ships. It had lost the irreplaceable capital of its naval air arm, the experienced pilots, bombardiers, and radio men. A generation of aircrew, forged in the early victories, was gone. The training pipeline was broken. From this day forward, the quality of Japanese naval aviation would be in terminal decline. In contrast, American pilot training and aircraft production were hitting their zenith. That night, on the mess decks, the mood was not jubilant, but somber and reflective. Men ate in quiet clusters, the adrenaline crash leaving them hollow. Some, like Kid Carson, were ebullient. "Did you see them fall, Skipper? Like leaves." Others, like Thompson, who had seen friends die in 1942, felt a more complex emotion. He thought of the young Japanese pilots, boys really, flying obsolete planes with inadequate training, sent on a suicide mission by commanders clinging to a broken doctrine. He felt no hatred, only a grim awe at the immense impersonal machinery of war that had just ground an air force into dust.
For Admiral Mitcher and the High Command, the implications were crystal clear. The victory was so complete it was unnerving. It validated every strategic and industrial decision America had made since Pearl Harbor. The Hellcat was proven not just as a fine fighter, but as the perfect tool for the war America needed to fight. By war's end, the F6F would account for over 5,200 of the 6,477 aerial victories scored by the US Navy in the Pacific, a staggering 75% of all kills. Its kill-to-loss ratio would stand at an almost unbelievable 19-1, the highest of any Allied fighter. Part 7. Legacy, the End of an Era and the Dawn of American Air Supremacy. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was the definitive, irreversible turning point of the Pacific Air War. Its legacy was profound and multifaceted. The death of the Zeros myth,
The psychological stranglehold the Zero had held on Allied pilots since 1941 was shattered. From this day forward, American and Allied pilots knew they had the superior machine and the tactical doctrine to defeat it. The sky was no longer a Japanese domain. The triumph of the system. The battle was a victory for the American system, industrial mass production, Hellcats, carriers, technological edge, radar, VT radio proximity fuses in the flak, advanced logistics, the underway replenishment group that kept TF-58 fueled and armed, and standardized, rigorous training. It proved that democracy's industrialism, when fully mobilized, could overwhelm martial spirit and individual brilliance. Strategic catastrophe for Japan. The fall of the Marianas was now inevitable. Saipan, Guam, and Tinian were captured, providing the airfields for the B-29s that would firebomb Japanese cities. The political fallout in Tokyo was immediate. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo's cabinet fell. Japan's defensive perimeter was ripped open. The Hellcat's ascendancy. The F6F became the iconic naval fighter of the war's latter half. It was the guardian of the fleet during the invasions of the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. It was the plane that first met the kamikaze threat. When the Japanese surrender was signed on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, a formation of F6F Hellcats flew overhead in a final symbolic patrol. The master of the sky witnessed the peace it had helped to win. In the quiet of history, June 19, 1944, stands as a watershed. It marked the moment when the qualitative and quantitative tide of the Pacific War became an irreversible flood. It was the day the ghost of 1941 was finally laid to rest, not by a miracle, but by the relentless humming factories of Bethpage, the rigorous classrooms of Pensacola, and the courage of young men like Dave Thompson and Jack Carson, who took a machine built for vengeance and used it to claim the sky once and for all. The Turkey Shoot was the brutal, necessary proof that the age of the fragile, exquisite warrior plane was over. The future belonged to the armored, powerful, and mass-produced, a lesson written in fire and metal over the deep blue of the Philippine Sea.